Welcome back. I hope you all had a nice Thanksgiving break. Your warm-up today for 4.4 sketching graphs of linear equations. Remember, linear equations are just an equation like this where we have a y and an x, okay? Remember, this is the form y equals mx plus b. That's just one form an equation can come in. That's linear, okay? If I give you that x is 1, tell me what y is going to be. If you really don't remember how to do that, you can kind of watch the rest of the video to kind of refresh your memory, okay? Because it's going to come up. So, I'm going to continue. Go ahead and pause and finish it. So, we're sketching linear equations today, okay? So, there's a couple different ways you can do this. We've learned a little bit of them, talking in the y equals mx plus b form. But today we're going to do probably one of the easier methods, but it's also one of the longer methods. So, step one is you create a table of values. So, you pick x values that are easy, okay? And then you find the y values. And then once you find your 2 to 3 points, you plot the points, draw a line through them, okay? When you're graphing with linear equations, you only need 2 points, okay? We're going to usually find 3 just to be safe, but you only need 2 points, okay? So my fingers were nice representations for you today. So my first equation here, it says graph the equation 1/2 x plus 1. Now I actually gave you, this is called a t-table because it looks kind of like the letter T if you highlight this part and then this part, right? It's called t-table. I have my x values on the left and my y values, so you can kind of think of these as like my points in parentheses here. The first column is 1 point, second point, third point. Okay. Now see how it's blank? That's because I get to choose the x values that I want. Okay. Now I'm going to choose, remember my instructions say pick x values that are easy. By that I mean 0, 1, 2, small numbers. Negative numbers work too, so -1, -2. Don't choose 1/2 to plug in. You guys don't like fractions that it is, or don't pick 1.35. Why bother getting a calculator? Okay, so numbers like that will be helpful. So whenever I choose it and I have 3, I do -1, 0, and 1. So I chose my 3 x values. If you want to choose them one at a time and then find your y value, that's fine too. So now, once I've chosen my x value, I'm going to rewrite my equation. And I know you guys can't see that yet, but I'm going to move it in a second. So off to the side, I've just written my equation. Now on a different marker, I'm going to do, my first one is x equals -1. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out here so you guys can see my work. So remember, when I'm given an x value, and this should be equals y, I apologize. I plug in the x value. So wherever I see x, I'm going to replace it with a -1. So I get y equals 1/2. And whatever I'm plugging in, I usually put in parentheses just to help myself out, especially when it's negative. And remember, there is an invisible multiplication sign between these two. Okay. So I get y equals -1 times 1/2 is just -1/2 plus 1. So this is like me taking away a half from 1. So that gives me y equals 1/2. Okay. So once I find that number, I'm going to take this number and put it back into my chart. So when x was -1, y was 1/2. So that's my first point for my graph. Okay. And now I'm going to rewrite my equation again, and then I'm going to go with my next point that I chose, which x is 0. So I'm going to start my whole equation over again. So I'm going to rewrite y equals 1/2 x plus 1, and x equals 0 in this one. Okay. So again, I'm going to plug in wherever I see an x, I'm going to plug in a 0. So I get y equals 1/2 parentheses 0, because whenever I plug in, I like to put it in parentheses. And remember, there's an invisible multiplication sign between here. So 1/2 times 0 is just 0 plus 1. So I get y equals 0 plus 1 is 1. So that's a nice point. It's a nice even number, or I shouldn't say even, a round number. It's not a half or anything like that. It'd be easy to graph. So again, I'm going to put that back in my chart. When x is 0, y is 1. And I'm going to start over one more time. Now remember, you only need 2 points, but I'm doing 3 just to be safe. So y equals 1/2 x plus 1. And my third x is 1. So I get y equals 1/2 times 1 plus 1. Because I plugged in, wherever I see an x, I plug in a 1 instead. So I get y equals 1/2 times 1, which is just 1/2 plus 1. So I get y equals 1 and 1/2. Okay, because 1/2 plus 1 is 1/2. So again, I take this back and I plug it back into my chart. So I used this equation 3 times to find 3 points. Okay, you only need 2, but I did 3. Now I can plot them on my graph. Okay. So again, I have the point -1, 1/2, 0, 1, 1 and 1/2. So I'm just going to count these by 1. So this will be 1, 2, 3, and so on, and 1, 2, 3, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can see my points here. So the point, remember your x is on this line, y is on this line. Okay, my x in my point, the x is always first. It goes in alphabetical order. So I go 1 to 1 and 1/2. So that's a little bit over 1. So I went over 1, up 1 and 1/2. So I went just about in the middle. So I did the third point first. Okay. 0, 1. So I don't go anywhere on the x-axis, and I just go up 1 on the y-axis. Okay. And then -1, I just go up 1/2. So I'm going right in the middle of this. So I went over -1, so to the left -1, up 1/2 a step. So if this whole square is 1, half of it would be right in the middle there. And then I take a wonderful straight edge if you have one available. And I draw a nice little line through it. And now this is a linear equation. You know it's linear because it ends up being a straight line when you plot it. Okay. So we're going to do a couple more of these. Okay, so you can kind of see there's a couple different steps. Choose your x values, find the y values, plot them. Okay.